Crysis is a first-person shooter developed by Crytek and published by EA in November 2007 for the PC. Considering the amount of elements they share, it's fair to call Crysis a spiritual successor to Crytek's 2004 title, Far Cry. Both are first-person shooters set on highly detailed and lovingly crafted tropical islands. Both put players in the shoes of a hardened soldier on a rescue mission. Both soldiers have special binoculars that highlight enemies on your minimap, making them a hell of a lot easier to sneak around. And despite their marketing and mechanical reliance on shooting things, both encourage sneaking around, especially on higher difficulties, which manage the game design hat trick of being rock hard without feeling cheaply unfair. Most of the time. Both games sold themselves as massive, free-form experiences that would melt your eyes, heart, and mind in that order, if they didn't melt your computer's graphics processor first. But Crysis immediately achieved a greater degree of infamy amongst PC players by forcing them to shell out hundreds of US dollars for upgrades, or play the game exclusively on low settings. Most unmodified off-the-shelf computers of 2007 were flat-out incapable of handling this game. My computer certainly couldn't at the time, which is too bad, because this game's pretty good, all things considered. And in 2011, EA smiled upon we poor console peasants and ported this sucker over to the Xbox and the PS3, without its online multiplayer components. A move I'm sure had nothing at all to do with the then upcoming release of this game's sequel. No, nothing at all. For now, welcome to the far-flung future year of 2020. You are U.S. Special Forces operative codename Nomad, a member of Raptor Squad. And you've received a distress call from a CIA agent who's been babysitting an archaeologist out in the South Pacific. So you and your team of one-note characters are tasked with halo dropping onto the scenic Philippine Sea island of Lang Shin. After the North Korean army, of all people, led by one General Kyong, a man with a reputation for staging massacres, have had a whole week to turn the island into their latest overseas expansion project. And apparently, this game takes place in a wacky parallel dimension where Kim Jong-il had a kid who was actually worth a damn, and whose name isn't Kim Jong-un, oddly enough, something I didn't discover until I found this radio on a second playthrough, and accidentally turned it on during a gunfight.
As you will remember, these islands were in the news 4 years ago, when the North Koreans supported the Marxist RFIP's independence movement. Tensions skyrocketed when the post-revolutionary government, backed by Kim Jong-chul, set about nationalizing billions of dollars of American corporate assets.
Right away, Crysis displays ever so slightly more clever writing than the average first-person shooter of this strata. The first lines of dialogue you hear subtly foreshadow the clusterfuck to come.
Man, this is Sky Chief, Red Angels 25, bearing east. Getting some radar interference. Looks like an electrical storm brewing.
That's a negative, Sky Chief. Nothing on our side. Skies are clear. Over.
And it's not long before that invisible electrical storm fries your equipment and scatters your team across Lang Shin's beaches. Thus begins the tutorial section, which will continue through the next 3 levels, far past the point where it stops being a necessary teaching tool and starts becoming an annoyance. Not only must players put up with the usual pop-up text boxes, flat out telling you which buttons to press, since God knows giving us a manual would just be a waste of paper, your commanding officers, first your squad leader, Prophet, and then a major named Strickland, who I always pictured as Principal Strickland from Back to the Future, right up until the moment he appears on screen, frequently chime in with tactical hints that are meant to be helpful, and more often than not end up being hilariously redundant.
Cloak engaged.
Nomad, you're closing in on that command post. I suggest you switch to cloak and sneak in undetected.
Why so much fuss over a tiny island far from either country's territory? And why would the CIA be babysitting an archaeologist whose name isn't Dr. Henry Jones Jr.? Well, like our old friend Indiana, this poor bastard, name of Dr. Rosenthal, has also managed to uncover an alien starship, so old the island's mountains have literally grown up around it. General Kyong's all set to crack the thing open and raid its no doubt fantastical technology, probably just so he can see the look on his dear leader's face when he stages an ice laser cannon-assisted coup. He definitely has the numbers. Shit, it looks like he's brought an entire division to this rock, complete with helicopters, tanks, attack boats, APCs, and endless waves of dudes with everything from assault rifles to miniguns. But you, as a Special Forces operative of the future, already have plenty of fantastical technology at your disposal. Most of it's contained in the game's main gimmick, the nanosuit. There's very little nano about it, but nanotechnology's already become to us what radiation was to our parents' generation of cheap, pulpy sci-fi plots. An all-purpose justification for any breed of advanced technology. But a suit of power armor by any other name will still let you grab a dude by the throat, lift him off the ground one-handed, and then chuck him into his friend at terminal velocity. Apart from the usual strength and speed enhancements any superhero needs to get the job done, the nanosuit also comes with its own cloaking device, making this the best Predator game I've played out of the 5 games with Predator in the title, and the dozen or so that stick Aliens versus in front of it. None have quite managed to capture the visceral thrill of stalking oblivious dudes through a jungle, taking them down quickly, if not exactly quietly, and then laughing as all their friends blind fire into the brush where you used to be just a second ago. With a little practice, you start to feel like an invincible badass, like you could take on this whole people's army if only you had a plasma cannon and a pair of wrist blades. Though the sniper rifles make decent substitutes for the former. But then you hit level 3, and the number of enemies climbs toward holy fucking shit territory. That's when your feelings of badassitude crash back down to earth, and you realize you're still as squishy as the next fella in the face of sustained fire. There's an armor mode to the suit that's supposed to make you tougher, but on the higher difficulties I found all it really did was make me sloppy. More inclined to leave cover and end up a bullet fruitcake. I made things much easier on myself once I took inspiration from, to my mind, a much better people's army, the Viet Cong. Like the Rand Corporation in the 1960s, the KPA of the 2020s has no idea what the fuck to do in the face of sustained hit-and-run guerrilla tactics. That's what you people get for carrying around Chairman Mao's book like a prop instead of reading it, suckers! By the mid-game, I had a nice groove going. Belly-crawling my way to victory through forests, rice paddies, and the occasional death trap of a tin-roofed outpost. I started to feel a little bad about mowing down all these waves of peasant conscripts, especially once the sun set and I remembered I had night vision and they didn't. I mean, these dudes probably don't give a fuck about General Kyong or Langshan Island. They're just filling out their mandatory 5-year term of army service. I mean, it's not like they could refuse. Well, they could, but they'd probably disappear soon after in the middle of the night, along with their entire families. Then their own nanosuit soldiers ambushed me in a graveyard, and what was an action game with some stealth tacked on for flavor became the most dangerous game of hide-and-seek since the most dangerous game. I knew, even then, that no video game worth its Metacritic score is going to bring up ancient aliens and then not have them turn out to be the big bad at some point. But Crysis takes a super jump over its competition by pacing itself so well. Every time you start to get comfortable, the ground shakes, and a little bit more of that mountain in the distance falls away, revealing the scope of what you're really up against. Then new enemies pop up while you're gawking to make you die stupid deaths and hate yourself. You don't realize how drastically the tables have turned until you're in the middle of a zero-gravity gunfight with a flying tentacle monster from beyond the walls of sleep. If you survive, you might just realize that suddenly you're the under-equipped peasant conscript, facing a technologically superior foe you cannot reason with and only barely understand. It's Predator again, except now you're back in Arnold's role. If only we could make our own exploding arrows. Okay, I admit it, I just want a good Predator game to call my own. But then again, I'm a simple man with simple tastes. I like science fiction, fake wars, and the occasional shot of a nice ass in tight khakis. Crysis gives me all that and more. You could tell this was designed for PCs because every button does something. And if you accidentally press one, you might as well just press restart checkpoint and save yourself some time. But this also means you can do a hell of a lot more than your average first-person shooter. Even today, 8 years after nearly every first-person shooter has had a chance to rip this one off. What does that say about the genre? Obviously, the version I played could not possibly be as visually stunning as it was and is on a top-of-the-line PC. It looks virtually identical to most console shooters released in 2011, or 2014 for that matter. What does that say about the genre? The port stutters like crazy when you hit a checkpoint. The draw distance, i.e. how much landscape the game renders between you and the horizon, and how fast it puts it all on screen, is a bit short for a game this obsessed with sweeping tropical vistas. You don't move through foliage so much as clip through it. Textures start looking fuzzier the closer you inspect them, and you'll have plenty of time to expect every single flaw if you play smart instead of hard, including the flaws in its writing. Since so much time spent shooting and or sneaking past bunches of dudes, there's very little time to characterize the 5 or so important people who show up over the course of this National Lampoon's South Pacific vacation. Consequently, most get forgettable walk-on parts, with the exception of Prophet, our first tutorial voice, and first alien abductee, Psycho, who seems to be the calmest person on Langshin, and who will most definitely be played by Jason Statham in the inevitable movie adaptation, and Nomad, our player character and nominal avatar into this world. But since I spent 75% of my time with Nomad silently stalking our prey, having some other character address me by his name never really stopped being jarring. Since Nomad has no personality to speak of, except for when he's monologuing his journey through an alien starship.
What? I just lost gravity. I'm using thrusters to stabilize myself. This'll take some getting used to.
I'd suddenly remember, oh, right, I'm not a silent protagonist. But that's as much the fault of other games with bland, boring, silent protagonists as it is with this one, who gave the protagonist a voice, but forgot to make him interesting, because they expected me to fill in the blanks with my own character. But of course, I'm a boring, cynical curmudgeon who sits in his house playing video games. Sometimes it actually works. Like this one time, when Nomad and I said the same thing in unison, in the aforementioned graveyard, while we were fighting our invisible enemies.
Nomad, we're still seeing movement down there.
And both Nomad and I answered him with one voice.
I'm working on it.
In a unison so perfect it was almost stereo surround sound. Nomad did not then add, "You want to come down here and fight these fucking ghosts, you be my guest, sir." But that's probably why he's a super soldier and I'm not. Nevertheless, the game undeniably succeeded at putting me in Nomad's boots, and more importantly, putting me in his mindset. Despite the aircraft carrier's worth of support you get near the endgame, Nomad's position as a nanosuit operative on the front lines means you'll do most of this alone, allowing the atmosphere of Langshin Island to absorb you in its blanket of sci-fi loveliness and horror. And frayed edges aside, it's a pretty comfy blanket. The sci-fi bits are the most interesting, obviously. The one thing that elevates this story above its low-rent action movie roots. These aliens seem to have evolved, or, more likely, engineered themselves for space travel. Gravity cuts out as soon as you get inside their ship, and their version of an EVA suit allows all of them to fly. Also, they love the cold. And as we all know, it is very cold in space. We must look like anglerfish to them. Monstrous creatures. Our proportions all wrong, barely moving around at all, and stunted by a lifetime at the bottom of a gravity well that would probably turn them into paste. Or maybe these are just the grunts, the spear tip of an invasion force, their version of a nanosuit soldier. A small taste of things to come. It's all left tantalizingly ambiguous, almost as if the storytellers trusted us to fill in the blanks for ourselves, or make conclusions based on the evidence they left scattered through the levels. Or they ripped out all the answers and put them into the expansion pack that they started selling less than a year after this game came out. An expansion that EA has decided not to port over to home consoles, for whatever stupid reason. The presence of that expansion, and 2 direct sequels, make me leery of saying anything outright in that regard. I imagine those will answer all my questions in a not at all satisfactory manner, since that's the way sequels tend to go, in any medium, but in video games most especially. Hence my writing this now, before either Crysis 2 or 3 have a chance to dampen my enthusiasm about their progenitor. Because Crysis isn't a perfect game, but it is a competent game, doing everything it does well without doing anything too terribly original. Its only genuinely original contributions to the medium were technical and graphical, and they have, obviously and by necessity, been surpassed, even by games restricted to the obsolete hardware of the PS3. It's the game equivalent of the paperback sci-fi novels they sell in grocery stores all across America. And if that sounds like it's worth $15 and a few nights of your life, have at it. I'm certainly glad I did. Basic competence generally isn't something you praise, but trust me when I say it's rare enough in the world of video games to still deserve it. And now we'll see if I can say the same thing about Crysis 2. Spoiler alert, I won't.